Hello, I am Dr. Sheri Parks. I am Vice President of Strategic Initiatives here at MICA. Welcome to the Fall 2020 Rights and Wrongs Mixed Media Lecture Series. This is the second of a three-part series that explores a range of perspectives, including the history of race in America and the Black Lives Matter movement, women's suffrage, and the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. Immigrant rights, public health versus individual liberty, voter rights and voter access, freedom of speech and the arts, and other topics. The series was proposed by Lauren Adams, who is MICA faculty in painting. The aim of the Mixed Media Series is to build important and imaginative public events that address the diversity of practice in our fields and the complex relationships between art, culture, identity politics, and belonging in the contemporary world. All of the events are free and open to the public. Now, if you are a student, be sure that you clicked on the QR code to get class credit. It will also appear at the end of the event. A performance note. Stacey Kirby's performance includes the persona Officer Kirby, who is a civil bureaucrat and is not to be confused as any other type of officer. As I mentioned, you get two co-hosts this afternoon. I will help hold the space and come in and out, but the featured co-host is Ladan Savar. Ladan is an interdisciplinary sculpture major at MICA. She has composed some intriguing questions and will also introduce our artist guests. Ladan?
Hi, my name is Ladan Savar. I'm a senior interdisciplinary sculpture major with a painting background. I am so honored to be this panel student co-host, and I thank all of you for joining us. This is MICA's annual mixed media event, and for our second panel in this three-part event, I would like to introduce our two guests for this evening. As incredible transformers of space, Stacey Kirby and Karyn Olivier are two artists that understand what it takes to challenge history, authority, bureaucracy, and reposition its narratives for a much more empowering context. With this event's theme in mind, our discussions will circulate our own engagement with history as it relates to systemic change and impact. So with that, I will introduce our first artist, Stacey Kirby. Stacy is a queer, self-appointed civil servant from North Carolina who creates socially engaged interactive performance art. Her performative interactions set within site-specific installations utilize bureaucratic forms, postures, and language in vintage office environments to engage participants and community performers in questions around civil authority. Through humor and satire, Kirby reinvents the bureaucratic process in alternative, private, and public spaces to elicit diverse dialogue about identity, community, and human rights in the United States. Developed over the past 20 years in more than 200 performances with over 300 community performers and 10,000 participants, Kirby's work evolves with the physical and historical setting, political climate, and participants' involvement at each location. Kirby has exhibited at many locations such as 21C Museum Hotel, Ackland Art Museum, Art Prize, and is a recipient of numerous awards, including the Art Prize 8 Jerry Grand Prize and a North Carolina Arts Council Artist Fellowship for Visual Artists, among many more. Stacy is currently coming to us live at 21C Museum Hotel, so without further delay, I'll turn it over to her.
Thanks, Ladan. I really appreciate you having me. And as Ladan said, I'm the Civil Presence Officer, Stacy L Kirby. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm here in a very official virtual capacity representing the Department of Civil Presence, as you can see. I'm coming to you again live from 21C Museum Hotel in Durham, North Carolina. Unfortunately, due to budget cuts and COVID, the department staff is not traveling right now. So we're glad to use these new technologies and upgrade a little bit and connect to all of you. It's very rare that department lets me out of the office to travel because it's such a busy time and due to public health restrictions. But the department would like me to thank MICA's faculty member and Rights and Wrongs curator Lauren Adams and Dr. Sheri Parks and my co-panelist Karyn Olivier. It's an honor to be sharing this time with you, and a special thanks to the students because of MICA, because if it wasn't for your commitment to the arts, the department wouldn't have me here tonight speaking with you, or this afternoon. And your virtual educational space is so important, and I just want to honor that out loud and say that, you know, we welcome your questions at the end for the Q&A, and reach out if you're interested in being part of the work that I speak about tonight. I'm always interested in working with students. So today I've been asked to talk a little bit about my art practice and to offer you a couple of things. One is to inspire you to find ways to share your own voice. Another is to encourage you to practice listening to those voices that historically have not been heard, and also to remind you of your collective power as students, as community, as family. It's an important time to express yourself. So I will say, vote wherever you are coming from today. Please, please, please make that plan, as we're all saying. So I'm going to start off by sharing some images with you all and do a little share screen here. Here we go. Thank you with your patience as we navigate the virtual realm. As I said earlier, I am the Civil Presence Officer. I'm just going to minimize some windows here. And so I am a queer self-appointed civil servant from North Carolina. I'm an interrogator of civic ritual, and as a staff member of the department, I'm continuing to assess my own white advantage and how racism exists within myself, my work, and committed to being part of this collective transformation. I've been with the department since 2007. The department brings me into spaces to build bureaucratic office environments, as Dan said earlier, and interact with the public about issues of identity, citizenship, and human rights. And in these offices, visitors or participants go through bureaucratic processes or assessments to fill out paperwork together. And we love creating that paper trail, as you're probably not surprised. But we ask you to reflect on your own contribution to some of these issues, or how they relate to your life, or perhaps how you're experiencing them in your life through civic rituals that you take part in. So we ask people to take a little time, be amongst one another while in the office, and share space. And of course, right now, that's a challenge due to public health restrictions. So we're changing some office policies and coming up with new ways to engage with people, for example, virtually with you all today. But a lot of what happens in the office is often improvisational dialogue about lived experiences and personal history. And we always give you a handwritten response option so we can mail these to public officials and remind them that they are representing us, whether they are voting on a bill, nominating a Supreme Court justice, wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, or simply tweeting. So I want to share with you, we also have in every piece, there's a type of takeaway, whether that's a button, a sticker, a receipt of participation. And that's kind of part of our paper trail too. And this, we hope that you come across this in your own personal collection that conjures up a memory from the experience in the office. And we offer, you know, hopefully some empowerment through participation and maybe potential shifts in perspective or a sharing of voices. And this is especially important right now during a time of disillusionment and lack of trust in our democratic process. So I wanted to share some of my lifelong appointments just to give you all a little view of what I've been doing for the past couple of years. I've been working in the declarations department, unpacking identity and belonging. I've also been in the civil validation department, really talking about LGBTQ+ rights and offering validation to our community. I've oddly enough been in a restroom as a facility permit officer for North Carolina Department of Compliance in response to something called House Bill 2, which some of you might be familiar with, called the bathroom bill. We talked about basic human rights through that piece. I was also promoted to deputy director in 2016. In response to the impact our office has made at Art Prize 8. I'm currently in training to become an officer in the Deaf Department, which we could talk later if we'd like about, but also currently I'm serving, as I said earlier, as the U.S. Civil Presence officer. Yes, and so I've been talking about a little bit about our staff that we have in the offices, and I wanted to just share a little bit about them. We work with so many different types of people. We've expanded our staff to include so many community members over the past 6 years, and we go through a little training with them, but mostly they inform the work that they do with the department. The staff is always contributing their own lived experiences and personal histories, and this is the strength of the work, as well as the engagement with the participants. And as you heard a little bit earlier, we have some exciting statistics to share with you, as we've installed over 200 offices in pods containers, in restrooms, protests, at sit-ins, at museums, interacted with over 10,000 participants, worked with 300 community members, and mailed over 8,000 cards and 8,000 voices, if you will. It's pretty impressive to be part of that, that kind of mailing. In terms of the Civil Presence Department, I wanted to share a little bit about that project, and then also about another project that relates to rights and wrongs. We've been opening civil presence offices throughout the United States over the past 2 years, where we engage in conversation about your civil presence. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, the department staff is on furlough due to COVID-19, and we're not conducting physical public assessments, but we are showing a training video, which I will share with you in a few minutes. But the process of this work is that we offer everyone, when they come into the civil presence office, a civil presence tag, and this information about who they are is included on the tag, and then an officer conducts civil presence assessments based on data collected in real time, which you'll see in the video, and then we determine where on the continuum between your civil presence and absence you are existing, okay? So I want to share this video, and before I do share this video, I want to give you a little introduction to the first officer that you'll meet in the video. And this is Elena Rodriguez de Paul. She is an incredible person. She's a social justice and environmental activist, a first grade teacher, and a mother of 2. She is a Venezuelan and seeking asylum in the United States. And this is something that I've learned so much about through her experience. And these are, this is language that she uses to describe her identity. I just want to make sure to be clear about that. And Elena has shared her lived experience with navigating the systems in this country as an immigrant and the discrimination that she faces daily. And a lot of this has informed this work and this performance that she's a part of. So I'm going to go ahead and do a switch to this video. Let's see here. Okay. We're keeping our fingers crossed that we're all on the same page here. Okay.
So, name, place of birth, your current city, and your alien status. By your number. Okay, 117, 118, and 119. Come on in, have a seat. Thank you. Hi there. Thank you so much for your patience waiting today. Okay, Susan and Jacob, awesome. So do you have a valid ID on both of you that I can see? Thank you. Okay, yeah. So unfortunately, we aren't accepting these anymore due to fraudulent activity. Do you happen to have a family Bible or a utility bill on you or anything like that? No. That's okay. We'll let someone else vouch for you. I have a feeling you might know some other people around here. So we're going to have you all stand up, and I'm going to take some physical presence measurements. So put your clipboards on the ground and stand shoulder to shoulder facing this wall at the black line down there with your toes down there. Yep. Okay. Yep, shoulder to shoulder, because we're all in this together, right? There we go. Let's take this. Yeah, that's a nice measurement. Okay, great. Bring your hands behind your wrists together for me. There you go. Behind you. So there we go. Yep. Good. Right behind you. I know it's a little awkward. Oh, you're so wet. It must be really raining out there. Okay, I'm going to come underneath your arm, sir. There you go. Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, go ahead and turn around for me. Bring your right hand up in a solemnly swear style. In a courtroom, I'm going to measure from your fingertip to your elbow. So there we go. Okay, bring it across your heart, and I pledge allegiance style. Have you pledged allegiance recently? Wow. How about you? Yeah. And I know, me neither. Don't tell my boss. I'm putting in for a promotion. Okay? So I'm going to measure from your forehead to your heart. Okay? This is head to heart. This is an exact measurement. You might want to hold your breath. Just in case. Nice job. Okay, so unfortunately, I'm picking up on a little bit of absence within all of you tonight, and I don't want you to worry. It's very common. I'm seeing this with a lot of people, okay? But I do have to stamp your tag with absence simply because my coworker is going to update your records as your status changes, and I promise it will change, okay? So, but I want to remind you that you live in the United States of America. I mean, this is the land of opportunity, right? You can have that American dream, right? You know, you're gonna have that six-figure salary as soon as you get out of college. Like, you can just pick it, and then whatever house you want, maybe that big SUV, you can fill it with gas and drive it around. It's totally up to you, whatever you want. But we need you to practice a little bit more presence, okay? But not too much. Now, I know it's kind of confusing, but so I have a couple of tips for you. Number one, we need you to speak our language, okay? So if you speak any other languages as your first language, you just want to keep that to yourself, okay? We're happy to have you here, okay? But we just don't want you to make other people feel uncomfortable. Number two, if you have any cultural beliefs that are kind of against the norm, really keep those to yourself well. We are happy to have you here. We just don't want you to feel, make other people feel uncomfortable. You know what I mean? So feel like a sheep, part of the herd, just go with the flow, right? Okay, okay. So I'm gonna give you these tags back because at the bottom, our next step is to give you a little bit of time to reflect on what your assessment has been or anything that you're thinking about or feeling right now. It's totally up to you what you're gonna be writing, okay? And I'll take you over and I'll show you how that's gonna work, okay? For you, you can have a seat in the black chair, okay? For you, Dan, there you go. Ready? 139, 130. Thank you for your wait. Thank you for So, it does appear that our staff has marked you absent. However, I see you have a statement of presence that you've written. Can I read this out loud? Of rules to follow. Is there only one true set of rules to follow? You get to make your own rules. Do we make too many rules for others? Excellent, thank you. Do you have anything you'd like to add? So the next thing we'll need to do is to take some fingerprints. So I'll need your right thumb and your right index finger. Here and here. And here and here. Twice. So your tag is completed, and we're going to advise that you wear this on your person at all times until your address is updated to present. And so we invite you to take your statement of presence along with your fingerprints and share those on the bulletin board. And you can also see what other participants have chosen to wear. Thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead and stop that and move on back to where I was. I've gotten lost in the virtual realm, but I will come back here. Here we go. Okay, let me, we're having a moment of transition here and it's all good. Okay. Here we go. So I'm going to go ahead and share this. And as you saw, we basically ended with statements of presence in that part after the pep talk, after I gave the pep talk. Thank you very much. And then we offered security blankets, and then people had a moment to write their statements of presence in this work, and officers process statements and then fingerprints. And then we mail all of the statements to public officials to share your voices that we collect during the work. The next piece that I'd like to speak about and share with you all is the power of the ballot. And this is a very, very important piece. Let me check this out right here. Okay, because in 2014, I was promoted to the position of Chief Precinct Officer of the North Carolina Board of Elections. And that was because in 2013, in case some of you didn't know, the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and there's no oversight in the South in regards to voter suppression in terms of gerrymandering, mishandling of absentee ballots, et cetera. And so North Carolina, unfortunately, is still taking part in a lot of these practices. And so the Board of Elections asked me to hold an election to bring voting rights issues up and have an interaction around that. So I used my own personal voting experience to create my own personal voting precinct, if you will. So I transformed over 100 bankers boxes that are used for financial records, and I transferred those into ballot boxes, one for each county in North Carolina, and there are actually exactly 100 counties in North Carolina. And then I designed and constructed a precinct by stacking these ballot boxes, and then I integrated this green curtain because I have this really important memory of going to vote with my mom when I was a younger person. And one of these, and this is kind of aging me here, the top right, these are these lever voting machines. So you walk in and you pull this lever and this green curtain comes behind you. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is such an impactful, important thing that I'm doing with my mom here, and I have to remember to vote, and that still comes back to me every time I go to the poll. But I wanted to integrate that in the work too. And then I designed these ballots where we pose the question of what obstacles do you overcome to vote? So the obstacles are the candidates in this election, and the voters write in their candidates and cast their ballots. And these can also be considered, you can also consider other people's obstacles when you fill in the candidates. And so at the end of the exhibition, we always tally ballots and announce winning obstacles and mail ballots to public officials that vote to restrict voting rights. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a video of this really quickly. There we go. Because I know that I'm getting close to time here and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So here's the power of the ballot.
Hi, how are you? I'm the Chief Precinct Officer on duty today. We're having a little bit of an unusual election in the gallery. We're having people fill in ballots with a list of obstacles that they overcome to vote. So the candidates in our election are the obstacles. And we're having people write down on the ballot a list of obstacles that you overcome to vote. So for you, it might be, the first one might be age, right? Because you're not 18. But then you can probably imagine some other obstacles people might have, right? Maybe like they don't have a car, for example, and they can't get to the voting precinct. So you sit down, fill that out, and then when you're done, you can come back to the voting precinct here and cast your ballot. And then we'll send all of the ballots after they're tallied and we announce a winning obstacle. We'll send your ballot to a North Carolina legislator to remind them of the effects of their votes on our votes. So you see, does that make you step into the voting precinct here and cast your ballot? There's a little bit of a surprise that happens. And yeah, and then we're actually tallying the votes on April 14th, and then we'll send all of the ballots to North Carolina legislators to remind them of the effects of their votes on our votes. Okay? So you're welcome to sit down when there's a free chair. These guys probably will be done soon. Or you can just take a ballot and stand up and write it. Your mom can help you vote, so just follow the instructions and ring the bell. Just tap the top of it. Ruth, are you okay? I'm going to shut you in, okay? And then you can get a receipt in a second. There you go. Thanks for participating. Trying to do that kind of stuff. Do you have any contacts?
I don't think you can get in there.
Good idea, sir. Good idea. Thank you. Let's see what number you are. Flip it over. You're 1,457. Wow, that's how many people have voted since the beginning of this exhibit. And a special stamp. Yeah. So we have a question. Do you know if your parents voted in the midterm election? Do you want to ask them if they voted in November? No. And why didn't they vote? It's okay, I'm not shaming you for procrastinating. That's okay. Well, I'm going to give you a button right here in support of your parents voting next time they have the opportunity, okay? To exercise their right to voice themselves in the country that we live in, okay? So maybe you can help remind them and ask if you can go to the poll with them. How about that? Yeah, you're welcome. Have a good one.
Okay, I'm going to stop right there. That, just in case you couldn't read the ballot, it says USA government. So I know that I'm really at the end of my time here. I want to show one more slide of what I'm showing at the Rights and Wrongs exhibition in honor of Lauren here. I've created, since we couldn't do that piece, we would love to have done that piece, but due to COVID precautions for the Rights and Wrongs exhibition, we could not install that piece. So I created a Baltimore County, city, a Baltimore City ballot box, and you can cast your ballot in this mini election in the exhibition if you come by and masked and socially distanced, of course, and take part. And then at the end of the exhibition, we'll look to the Baltimore community to decide which public official should receive the ballots in the mail, and we'll announce a winning obstacle, if you will, at the end of the exhibition. So thank you so much for having me, and I will turn it back over to our facilitators.
Thank you so much, Stacey. Now I will be introducing our next guest, Karyn Olivier. Karyn is a Philadelphia-based artist and educator who creates public art, sculpture, and installations that expose social, political, and economic contradictions and the residue of slavery in contemporary culture. She has exhibited at the Gwangju and Busan Biennials, World Festival of Black Arts and Culture, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Whitney Museum of Art, MoMA PS1, as well as the recipient of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation Fellowship, the 2018 to 2019 Roma Prize, among many other achievements. She has recently been selected as the artist for the Dinah Memorial Project, a memorial to one-time enslaved housekeeper at the Stenton House in Philadelphia, known for saving the mansion from being burned by the British. Olivier is currently an associate professor of sculpture at Tyler School of Art and Architecture. So now I'll be turning it over to Karyn for her presentation.
Super great to be here. That was amazing, Stacey. I knew a lot of that work, but it was so good to see the videos. Okay, don't waste time. I'm going to share my screen quickly. I'm going to show 3 projects. This is an image of a flawed and problematic fresco, a New Deal era fresco by Anne Weisel Hanlon that has been at the center of controversy and debate at the University of Kentucky for years now, about 30 years, I would say. People feel like looking at it today in this contemporary lens, contemporary eyes, a fresco reads as a kind of sanitized portrayal of history. It glosses over the pain, suffering, and brutality of slavery. It shows a caricature portrayal of Native Americans. There's only one Native American represented. He's kind of seems poised to attack the lone white woman. Here you have, the musicians who are kind of forced to perform for the white elite. A boy denied access to the performance venue, getting a peep from the view from the tree. So the president decided to cloak the mural for 2 years to give the community time, both within the university and the outer community, time to decide what should we do. It's a fresco, so the idea of taking it down, removing it means destroying it. So they decided what they would do is have an artist, commission an artist to make a work that would be in conversation. How do you speak about the work? Make a work that can confront the past, kind of through a contemporary lens. I was selected to do something. So this is in the lobby. The next The space when you first enter, they wanted us to engage was the vestibule. So you walk into the Memorial Hall, it's the vestibule, and then the next room is the lobby. So I decided I wanted to engage the ceiling because it had this amazing dome ceiling with these 4 medallions. I kind of decided I wanted to make an installation to kind of have a view of the whole space. So what I decided to do, this is another angle from up in the scissor lift. I decided to appropriate and reproduced in the likeness of the mural all of the black and brown figures that existed. And I decided to insert them into this gold, to this dome ceiling that I gold leafed. And of course I was thinking about sacred paintings, I was thinking about Renaissance cathedrals, but I was also thinking about gold as an interesting material to use because of its complicated history. Yes, it has references to I think about George Floyd's tomb that was in gold, but it's a complicated material that it was at times stolen from sub-Saharan Africa. And what does it mean for it to be kind of positioned in these kind of imperialist sites like churches? So I was thinking, well, let me just use this material because the first thing that happens, someone enters and they kind of look up, and all of a sudden that act kind of elevates these figures to the divine. In a way, I was hoping to give a space for these black and brown figures to kind of exist outside of whiteness. All of a sudden, the subjugated have been elevated to the divine, but also I was thinking, what does it mean to also position it as almost like a rebirth? And I was also thinking, like, I had different things. I was thinking about what would it mean for you to kind of to see these figures that don't have names, and all of a sudden now, what does it mean for them to become saints? But also to kind of understand like the subjugation we're kind of existing still in today. I was interested in this figure in particular. So this horse carriage driver who's kind of resting. And I was trying to think, what should I do? Because he's in a space of his own memory and his own dreams. So I decided to kind of place him back into the horror. So I have him kind of in this dream space, kind of falling down where you see the slave with the sickle, kind of to remind us of the horror of it. I kept calling these folks the witnesses. They weren't allowed entry into the train, so they're kind of on the sidelines of the railroad. I kept thinking of them as the witnesses, and then I ended up calling the piece witness. I was thinking I wanted a word that would be both a noun and a verb, a word that could be both active and kind of implicate or kind of demand that you kind of interrogate our kind of complicated history through this work and through both works. And around the base of the dome, I put a quote from the famous 4th of July speech to slaves that Frederick Douglass gave. The quote is, "There's not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him." So I was hoping that I would kind of shoulder these celestial beings. And then I decided in the medallions to have kind of underrepresented figures. So this is Georgia Davis Powers. She was the first Black senator elected in Kentucky. She did a lot of bills against discrimination. This is Chief Redbird, who lived peacefully among the white settlers. He was killed by 2 Tennessee men. They were never brought to trial. This is, again, I had to kind of come up with a silhouette. It talks about who gets to be an archive, who's represented. Was forced to kind of imagine what he looked like. So this is Peter Durrett, who was a slave. Then he was freed. At the time of his death, he had started the African Baptist Church. At the time of his death, it was the largest congregation in that part of Kentucky. This is representing Charlotte Dupuis. She filed a case against her slave owner. Her slave owner was Henry Clay. He went to serve as Secretary of State in DC. When he came back, he demanded her to be a slave again. She said no. She was put in jail. So this was kind of like the precursor to the more famous Dred Scott case. So I was thinking about what does it mean to kind of have this dome ceiling in this building? So what does it mean to have a dome ceiling? Domes are from period history. Domes are from Islamic cultures. Domes are from this Byzantine. I was thinking, what would it mean for students and faculty or whoever come through this building? So I kept thinking I wanted to do a piece where there'd be repeat viewings. I kept thinking, what would it mean to have a piece that actually asked us to confront our histories, asked us to kind of wade in the kind of like the pain and the trauma. Like I kept thinking of this piece, once I finished this piece, this was the moment for them, the school, to kind of do the work. Now this is kind of setting a stage. This is kind of proposing the questions. But in the end, I mean, in the wake of the George Floyd and the movements this summer, the presidents decided to to take this down, and I wrote a Washington op-ed piece, which I won't go into, but I was kind of thinking, what does it mean? Are there any works from the 20th century that are problematic that can be used as tools? Or the fact that I made this piece that was made to be in conversation and to confront the history, what does it mean to kind of censor my work? So there's a whole thing I wrote about it, and it's still in debate, but we can talk about that later if we have time. This piece is called Fortified. I built this wall that literally became part of the architecture, a part of the infrastructure. It looms kind of massive. It feels impenetrable. I was thinking of the function of walls as borders, shelter. They protect some and keep others out. They're signifiers of power. Here, instead of mortar, it's held together. It's fortified literally with used clothing. But when you get closer and closer inspection, it reveals itself to be quite porous. Walls aren't supposed to be porous. I was thinking how the cracks are exposed between the brick, which kind of, there's an assumed solidity or fixity to the wall, but now with these cracks, you realize that the wall in a way is malleable. It's mutable. And what does it mean for it to be mutable? So a lot of the clothes were provided by family, friends, museum staff offered up pieces, strangers. So there was this sense of maybe a democratization or generosity and agency in that gesture. And because this wall was kind of so much larger than my first iteration, I had to have other hands help me to finish it. And I was thinking, like, what does that mean to have these other hands, other varying aesthetics, varying tastes and flares that are present in the work? I was also thinking, I was hoping to maybe toggle kind of between the too muchness of this. I mean, it's hundreds of pieces of clothing, which then represent hundreds of bodies that previously were worn. And what does it mean to have that up against like the up close kind of intimacy of like this compressed infant's pajamas? And then I was hoping, you know, too, that it was a strange, I was hoping this would happen, but there's a strange thing when you got close to it and looked up, you were very much aware of its instability. And then when you turn around, I was excited that a different experience would happen. You kind of feel the weight of the clothes, again, this surrogate for the body. And I kept thinking maybe that this wall, it's in a way, it's a monument. A monument, I was hoping it could address being a monument or memorial, maybe to human costs. It speaks to the force, might, and will to construct. But I kept thinking, like most empires and oppressive systems, they can be dismantled brick by brick. Okay, this is a final piece I'm going to show. In my work, I'm often trying to intersect, collapse, and collide multiple histories with present-day narratives. And that began with me thinking about the talking statues in Rome. These are these 16th century statues. There were about 8 of them. And they were really used. They were like activated. They became living and breathing entities. Anonymous messages were attached to these public statues. They reinvented them as sites of protest, political dissent, critique, and commentary on the religious and political authorities at the time. At times there were responses, there were people posted responses between them. So I was interested in what it mean for these statues to talk about multiple histories and shifting authors. What does it mean for a statue to become a spokesperson? They really became active, mutable, and contemporary. And I think about what does it mean to have something, a monument or something from the past, but if we're seeing it today, how do we think about it being a contemporary object? So I was thinking about that. So in Monument Lab, they just won a huge grant, Mellon Foundation. They proposed, they asked 20 artists to do works in 20 parks around the city. And the proposition was, what's the appropriate monument for the city of Philadelphia? And we were charged with making prototypes. And there's this thinking that Paul and Ken share, that the head of the co-curators of Monument Lab, the idea that monuments can be prototypes. And I'm very interested in that idea. So I decided to do a piece in a park near my home in Germantown. It's about 5 blocks from my house. And there are 2 monuments I was very interested in. This is a monument dedicated to Francis Daniel Pistorius, a German settler. And later on, the neighborhood became known as Germantown because it had such a German stronghold. In 1688, he led the first Quaker protest against slavery. So that's almost 200 years before it was abolished. I found out that during World War I and II, they boxed over this monument. I think about xenophobia. I think about the struggles and the problems we're having today. the idea that he, even though he was living and was a settler and he wasn't considered American, and they thought the look of the monument was too Germanic. So I was thinking about that. So that's in the far corner of the park, which is really upsetting because it's it's in a Black neighborhood. You would think that it would be, I just hate that you almost miss it. But of course, centered in the middle of the park is a monument dedicated to George Washington. Of course, we know why he would have a monument. It's called the Battle of Germantown Memorial. It's dedicated to the only Revolutionary War battle that was fought in Philadelphia. It was a failed battle. We lost that battle, and you read the myth about what happened. It's kind of interesting about how myths are formed and how when history is created, something is silenced, right? So the monument in the center. So I was thinking about these two. So you have George Washington, the Revolutionary War, fighting for America's freedom from British rule. Then you have Francis Daniel Pistorius, a German, fighting for African Americans. So we have George Washington fighting for liberation while having slaves. We have Pistorius fighting for Blacks' liberation. I was thinking about the paradox and complexity and how these two opposing things can happen in a society. So I decided I would transcribe the history of what happened to the Pistorius monument onto the Germantown Memorial. So I was interested in different things it could do. I like the idea that I was trying to have this monument that could feel oppressive in its materiality. I was interested in what would it mean for a monument to be boxed over, so it reflects to a history, but mirroring it now reflects that the monument is never sitting still. It's always shifting. Even if no one's in the park, every moment it's something else. And that's a problem often with monuments. There's something about their permanence of material belies any other kind of reading of what can happen. I was thinking about if it's mirrored, it kind of shifts the perspective. I was thinking about what does it mean for it to be kind of larger than life and up close you see yourself. When you see yourself, what does it mean that you see yourself reflected in the monument? So what does it mean that now, in a sense, you become the keeper and protector of democracy? Like somehow you're indebted to this if you become the monument itself. And it was important that it was in a Black neighborhood that's a predominantly poor neighborhood. Depending on where you enter the park, it was invisible. And I definitely wanted it to be in conversation with the Confederate monument debate. And this piece was installed about 5 days prior to the Charlottesville tragedy. I was also thinking it was a neighborhood park. It wasn't, a touristic park downtown where it was one viewing. I knew it'd be repeat viewing, so I was interested in doing a piece, first of all, making a piece that was really good for my neighbors. That was like a struggle. But I thought, what does it mean that you see a monument every day and maybe you don't register it because you see it all the time so you don't see it anymore, like a billboard, or you don't see it because you think it deals with someone else's history. So I thought, what would it mean to have something that's familiar that becomes strange? So then I was thinking, I loved how it changed over the seasons. Things happened around this thing that you can't even imagine. Like there were prayer circles that happened. I had folks think that the piece was going to be destroyed within a day with graffiti, which would have been fine because this belongs to the people. There were stewards who kind of cleaned it every day if anyone left anything. So it was a kind of amazing people how they rallied around it. So it's really this idea of a monument, the idea of this mirror allowed the piece to not only engage that y-axis, which we normally associate with monuments, where you have this reverence of looking up. What would it mean that where the mirror is reflecting what's above, behind, and before you? So I was interested in kind of engaging these different axes. So this poet and historian, Tripita Mason, I didn't know she was going to do this, but she wrote a poem about this piece, and we're going to play this, and that'll be it.
Monuments to Brown Boys. The artist installed a mirror over the monument, and the people have come to gawk. Rubberneckers wonder what was there before, and you have come too, laying in the cut, statue still for seconds, your reflection edging off a 20-foot high bronze looking glass. You are an alluring hunk of stone beguiling me. Yes, you, brown boy, rough cut monolith. I see you. You are a low-slung, jean-wearing, grandmother greeting pillar, an obelisk marking the entrance of your hood. You need to be somebody's memorial, not only when you laid out and lowered in the dirt, your pillow a marble headrest of past tense, he was, he once, he lived. No, you are now and present, alive and in color, and you need to be somebody's walking shrine, somebody's testament, somebody's tribute in this city. You have to be carved, stretched, and erect, a column to buttress boogeymen, the phantoms they say you imagine, the specters and goblins who told bullets and policies and laws that encase you. You need to be somebody's memento. Look how you're beaming off that seeing glass. I'm catching your shine. Look at that swagger you carrying, hoodie wearing, fresh fade having, full teeth grinning. You need to be somebody's something to fight for, somebody's celebration, somebody's stone turned monument, carved and smooth, our masterpiece in this city.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Karyn. You need to be somebody's memorial, yeah, indeed. I need to ask you a clarifying question before we move on. With the University of Kentucky mural, you said the governor or the president, did he take down the historic mural or your dome?
He's planning to take down the mural, but it's also the, Wendell Berry's actually doing a lawsuit because it's actually state land, so you can't take it down. But my thought was, my problem with is in his kind of act to be politically correct, he's kind of negating a Black woman's, I mean, without that work, my work is rendered mute. Like I will take my piece down because it doesn't make sense out of the context that I was trying to confront. Yeah.
Okay, I just wasn't clear, and I knew if I wasn't clear that other people might not too. So, so for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to do a conversation between the four of us, mostly Ladan and Stacy and Karyn, but I'll flit in and out. And then we will open it up for questions. So if you have questions yourself, go ahead and write them either in the Facebook question space or our space here in Zoom, and we'll get to as many as we can. So, Ladan?
Great. Okay. I'm very excited because we have a lot of exciting stuff to unpack here. So for my first question, I just wanted to start off by briefly referencing your work Witness for Karyn, and then Civil Presence from Stacy. So with works that are so politically charged, and also just as being artists, the way that we carry that power and that source of information and knowledge, and as that becomes an angle of responsibility in our communities, how do you feel that viewers are impacted by your work? And is there anything that you wish to see or change within that?
I love how Karyn passes things to me with her. She's like, yeah, it's all you, Tag. How people are impacted, that was part of the question. And what was the end part, the wish or the change? Okay, I just want to make sure. So I can't speak for everyone's lived experience in my work, through my work. I can only speak to what people have expressed to me, of course. And it depends on the pieces. And you're talking about civil presence and specifically. So what I've found with civil presence is that it really depends on your lived experience, how you experience the work. I have people, even just in showing the video during a presentation, be really triggered by the work and feel this intense discomfort and uncomfortability about this matter and about some of the movements and the language that I'm using. And I completely honor that. And I think it's very important that people understand their own boundaries and how they want to engage in the work and whether they would like to or not. And so I usually give people the opportunity to sit near the work and kind of as a voyeur a little bit, depending on if the space allows, and decide what they want to be involved in. And obviously people always have the opportunity to not not participate in the work. But I think, you know, in civil presence, people feel a lot more challenged in this piece than in some of my firmer pieces where I was doing a lot of uplifting and validating. And I think that's actually a reflection too of how I feel within the context of our country right now, because I've created some of those other works under different administrations. And so I feel like it's a reflection of the time that I'm in as an artist, and what we're experiencing in this country. And so it brings up a lot for different people. And I feel like I'm going in a circle here, but the reactions are varied. And there have been people of color, specifically in the Black community, that have watched the piece when I've done it on the street and have been honest with me that they don't want to participate in the work because they've been through that, is their language, and I completely understand. And sometimes I feel like this work is a little bit for a different community than the Black community in terms of what people experience through the work, or perhaps being an immigrant. A lot of people have experienced a lot of these processes. So there is definitely a discomfort that happens in the work, and I figure out how to navigate that as a performer and as an artist in a way that feels appropriate to the work that I'm doing, and not overstepping boundaries and pushing people into a dangerous area for themselves. But again, I hold space for people to decide whether or not they take part in the work, and we never forced anyone. So does that answer? Yeah, okay.
I was thinking about that. I'm thinking the different responses, say, to witness compared to the battles joined. Witness has been problematic. Even, I mean, the end when I did the piece, and it's a breathtakingly beautiful piece. The administration clapped and all that, and I kept saying to them, this isn't the end. You have to do the work. Like, there should be a seminar every semester. There should be something. We should be getting other artists to make works and cover. Don't just think you solve this. The racism and white supremacy is so embedded. Don't put that labor on me to take care. I made this artwork, and now you think your job is done. You paid me like $30,000 and you think you're good. And that was the problem with it. And I went off to Rome to do that program. And I kept saying, is anything happening? Are they doing any programming? So it was problematic in that some of the Black students were still upset. They're like, we don't want to pass by this mural. So then they decided, why don't we change Memorial Hall not to be a place where people have to take, like, you know, gen eds that everyone has to take. And then the Black faculty proposed to the university, why don't we make this a center for, like, memorial and like anti-racism work? Like, why don't we actually have this building, have this long history, be a model? And the president kind of ignored it. So kind of like the faculty kind of contacted me when it was coming down saying, what's going on? We told them we want this work. Like, we're actually using this in our classrooms. But I kept thinking, like, what does it mean? Like, whose burden, whose work is it? My work, I said to them, I was like, the role of the artist is to ask the questions that the answers hide. Like, it wasn't about solve. So in that case, but I had empathy, I mean, with the students, you know, I started thinking about the students and the real pain and trauma. But I was also thinking about, like, I was going out and protesting a lot, and I kept saying, this protest at moments is totally devastating. Other times it's joyous. Protest could be a site of healing. Pain could be a site of healing. So I kept thinking, like, in a way, my response, I was hoping it could be one of the things that could be, it could be a tool, it could be a catalyst, it could be an agitator, but also could be a salve. It was, you know, it wasn't mean for it to kind of be a space of opening, a space of, like, dealing with the polemics. But I think we're in a charged time with universities, and particularly liberal arts, where there's a heightened agency that students have, which in a way could take away space for discourse. So there was no, I mean, there was one of the head of the Black Student Union actually said, she's a Black Caribbean, she was born in the Caribbean, she shouldn't have been chosen. I'm like, wait, do you realize when I walk down the street, no one's thinking I'm Black Caribbean? So it's a funny, like, thing, but then you look at a piece like Val's Join, that day and I started installing, I had this guy come up to me, I had to, like, stop installing. He's like, what is this? People are starving right there. And I'm like, I know, because I live right there. He's like, how could this be? How could you spend $25,000 on an artwork that's going to be up for 4 months? He's like, how can you? And so we just talked for hours. In the end, I was like, I believe that we have the right for beauty. We have the right to see ourselves as beautiful. It shouldn't only be in Society Hill. It shouldn't only be down where the tourists are. We're beautiful and we should see ourselves. And I'm not saying it's going to solve hunger. I'm not saying it's going to do anything. But I mean, I tell this story and I'm going to not cry. I mean, there was a Marine vet who I'd see every day. He started off the day, okay, had his big brown liquor. And every day, like, you know, by the afternoon, he was drunk. I'm about to have an interview, and the first time he calls me over and talks to me, and he's like, I'm a Marine. I had to kill that woman and child. I'm a Marine for life. That was something in that object, seeing himself and being acknowledged, having another woman say to me, they must know we're still here if they let you make this. So this object, I knew it was going to be interesting. I knew what it mean to become the monument, all those things. I didn't know there'd be prayer circles. You know what I mean? So it was interesting. It went from being like the value, what kinds of value are we talking about? No, I can't, this isn't going to feed someone, but it's going to feed them in another way.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those were both really incredible responses. Yeah, I think that's just something that's been on my mind, is making such incredibly powerful and impactful work. How are, you know, viewers embodying that when they go about their day-to-day? How are they internalizing that and thinking about the ways that that shifts their own outlook? But yeah, thank you so much. So for my next question, for both you, Karyn and Stacy, acquiring proper space is really crucial to the power of your work. We see this with Fortified and moving the obelisk, or with civil presence in the power of the ballot. And with more recent critiques of museums and institutions for their longstanding history with racism, inequality, and even this month's call for a boycott of museums, how do you both as artists feel about utilizing museum or institutional spaces? And is there a way to visualize a more transformative future for museums?
Well, I'll give you an example, not what I think, but I'll give an example of a piece of one of my students did, former grad students, Kara Springer, who was the author of that letter to New York Times about the Whitney show. Her thesis showed, she had an installation in the gallery space, but there were these 3 walls in the gallery that were kind of movable walls. She filled it with like canned goods and water bottles with water. And she said, wouldn't it be amazing, I'm paraphrasing, if museums could be the site that people go to? If the revolution comes, things come, could that be a site for care? Could it be a site to take care of us? Could it be a site of, like, in an emergency, that's where I'm gonna go. And I was like, whoa, this is the best piece ever. You know, and I keep thinking about that. And I like that it was hidden. And the people who need it will know to come here. There was something that was so, the rest of you can look at the art, beautiful, context, metaphors, political, but when things go down, that wall is filled, it's gonna sustain you. To me, so I don't know, like, I wanna be able to do something that good in a museum.
Yeah, that's interesting, Karyn. I think, you know, I worked in a museum in conservation for 8 years, and I also an art museum, and I also worked in a history museum. So I have a lot of experience from the inside of museums, and I think that a lot of I can't speak for every employee at a museum, but I think they yearn for them to be community spaces. Like, they yearn for people wanting to be that for the public, but there are so many obstacles, excuse me to use a word that keeps coming up, that keep that from happening. And I think that's a lot of what people are trying to change and dismantle and have awareness around. And you know, I think for my work, working in museums, what working in a museum offers for me in my career is a financial support to have the work happen, which is a little challenging with the performative interactive work in terms of funding, but it does change the interaction that I have. Like when I do work that's out in the street, I'm interacting with a different part of a different cross section of the public, or at a sit-in, or a protest. Like it's a different interaction that happens. So I think it's an interesting challenge as an artist to identify what the audience that's being drawn to museums or sees museums as a non-intimidating resource or something that represents them or reflects them in the community. I think that's interesting to think about what type of work I do in that setting and what kind of conversations I'm starting or questions I'm posing for that specific community. But I also like to point out to people, having worked in museums, is that we talk about museums as if they're objects, and they're actually people. People work in museums. They are comprised of people. And so I think, with the museum boycott, looking into that a bit and thinking about that, I think that they are in a very vulnerable position, as a lot of us are right now with COVID-19. And I'm not negating other lived experiences, but I think that this is an important time of vulnerability and transformational time for us to express what we need as people in the public, what we need from museums, what we want them to be, and whether that means boycotting, whether that means talking to someone that works at a museum if you have access to those people, or whether that means there's just so many different ways depending on how you want to express your voice. And I think for me, I'm finding my own ways to do it as an artist and choosing who I work with. And also, but it's important to remember that museums are comprised of people that are also trying to do things, and communicating with them in your needs, I think, is very important, however you find a way to do it. So.
Museums have come really far, but we have to just be realistic that they will always be behind the curve. Mm-hmm. Because they're so beholden to the boards, and how do we shift that? Yeah, get a third of them not be those people and some regular folks on the board. That will change it, but yeah, until it happens, they are going to they have to get their approval. Once you're saying I have to get everyone to agree, it's late. You're already 10 years late. You know what I mean? But I tell my students, yes, the museum should be one of your publics, but there's also your friends, living room that you have artist shows. It's also the street. Like, you should have many publics for your work. And the museum's one, and we're hoping that they will. I do think, already one museum has already shifted something. So I do think it's like police reform. It was like, yeah, it's going to happen. I think only one city has done anything, like in terms of something passing. So I think it's going to take a while, but I think this moment of reckoning. I think some things are going to happen. Of course, not fast, because they are these colossal dinosaurs in a way. Even the best of them.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Karyn's saying. I worked for a state museum for a while, and honestly, that's tied to a state budget. It has private money too, but it's the hierarchy and the patriarchy is so embedded in that you just can't decide today to remove that and then have a different museum. It takes such a long period of time for change to happen. So
I'm interested in Philadelphia. Nato Thompson, who was the head curator at Creative Time for years, he now started the Philadelphia Contemporary, and there's no building, it's itinerant, and I love that. It's like, so now in a way doesn't have to worry about the lights, doesn't have to worry about the bills. He could rent a space, could be outside. So there's something I'm interested in the idea of more of those kind of museums where you don't have to necessarily have this stuff to hold up that's costly, that takes away from kind of taking risk.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to interrupt just for a second to remind people that if they want to post questions, they can go ahead, but we're just going to keep talking while you're going. And Karyn, you reminded me that when we had the Baltimore uprising about 5 years ago, I actually was at a committee meeting at a museum, and my daughter was out of town, and she panicked because she just heard, downtown Baltimore, and she knew I was somewhere downtown Baltimore. And the person, she finally tracked me down at the museum, but the person who answered the phone, because I wasn't answering my phone, said, no, they will not come here. And and that idea that the museum was an indifferent space and they would never come one way or the other to the museum. And I think that's the question about museums is how do they not be places of indifference? And you know, they're different. So I'm going to hand it back to Ladan for another question.
Yeah, I mean, just to close our discussion with museums, I especially think boycotting for this month has been really controversial, especially because the Instagram account that started it, Change the Museum, is completely anonymous. So it's a lot of employees at museums that are disagreeing with it or questioning if it's even helpful in the first place. So I don't know, I'm glad I could hear both of your opinions on that.
So tricky. And we can't move as monoliths, you know, because that's not, you know, that
Right.
can't be
Yeah.
that's in opposition to me. There's got to be other voices. And I don't want to, I'm hoping they don't read it as that's the only, either for or against. It's like, can we have nuance? Nuance.
It's
I mean,
complex.
that's why I wrote my Washington op-ed piece. I heard they were just saying how the Netflix, whoever, they were going to pull Gone with the Wind until they get the craft of language that they could kind of have before you sing. So this is a racist film, and the racist time it's an important masterpiece. So I was thinking, oh, they're keeping that, and they're going to take down this mural. And I was thinking, wait, I was thinking like, okay, Anne Rice O'Hanlon I'm sorry, off topic. She included Black slaves in this mural. There were problematics with it. But in the same university, there's another New Deal era mural called Work, and there's not a single Black person in it, but no one's protesting that one. So it's, you know, it's kind of like, so I was thinking, well, is there a space? Can we hold two opposing things in one hand? I'm always wondering that, like, okay, the museum is failing in this way, but there's this. I remember museums from when I was a kid that the educational programs were lame. There's some real interesting stuff now. Sean Leonardo and the Guggenheim, that was amazing. So there is, you know.
Well, and that's where your work, both of your work speak to each other, because you're about what is visible and what matters and what is present and what is visible. I mean, I think it's the conversation of having, it's probably Lawrence Genius said, the conversation of having both of you here at the same time, because that's really what you are talking about.
I think I'm going to move on to one of my next questions. Since with both of your work, you tend to take the past or take like bureaucratic forms and iconography and interject that into our present in a completely different context. So I was thinking a lot about the diaspora, but specifically the African diaspora. Of course, this can be expanded just beyond the African diaspora, but simply how scattered our histories and our origins are. Do you feel that you're reclaiming these histories in your work, or do you feel that there's this sort of reconciliation with the past that happens with your work?
Me, or you? Can you go?
Go ahead, Karyn.
You're like, I don't deal with Black folks. You do.
I mean, I feel like I am reclaiming through my work a lot of in reframing some of the history. And I think for me, I can speak from the LGBTQ community and taking, you know, kind of queering an office space through being a queer person in the office and being, I'm not fully in charge, but there is a bit of control that I have to what's going on in the environment and what comes in and what is, you know, installed. And obviously, and I like to work with the LGBTQ community as performers, actually, and allow them to bring, you know, honor what the history of our society and our community has been, and then, you know, bring that to the work and the performance, and then reclaim their power through the work that they were doing. You know, I had, when I was at Art Prize, I had a wonderful person named Jason, who identifies with the pronouns of he, him, and he had recently gone through a transitional process, and he was signing as the declarations officer in the office when people came through the work. He was signing his name for the first time, his new name that he had claimed for himself for the first time on these cards. And these declarations cards actually travel with the work, and I still have all 3,000 of them and will continue to do this work and compile cards in the archive. But he came up to me after his performance in the work and said, I just realized that I signed my new name, you know, my real authentic name of who I am in this body, in this gender identity that I'm claiming through the work. And I just thought that was incredibly powerful, that that he found the space within the work. And I can only try to hold the space and open the space, but I don't define the space, and people step in and hopefully, you know, find their way of, you know, sharing their identity. So that's kind of how I would answer your question in terms of reclaiming. So.
Yeah, I do think about invisibility and blind spots a lot. I think about bell hooks a lot, you know, the power of the margin. You know, the Bronx was burning literally in the 70s, and that was the birth of hip hop. You know what I mean? It's like no one cares, no one's paying attention. And that was actually a radical space for freedom in that. So I think about, what does it mean to be like in the margins and allowing that creativity? What does it mean to have something that's invisible, and then when you, all of a sudden you see it, and now it can't be denied? But I also think about, when I'm thinking about these multiple histories, I'm always thinking like history is told to us, and we receive it, well, partly some of it's fiction because of the silencing, but then the other part is like, it gets revealed to us in a fragment, as fragments. So we are having to fill them in as they go on, but once new things are unearthed, it kind of changes our understanding or our position, our subjectivity, you know? So I think I'm thinking about like invisibility and visibility, and what's the kind of like the power of the invisible, but also the idea of like fragmentation. Like, we don't have the full story. It's not a monolith. It's not a single perspective. Like we abandoned that, you know, so long ago. So what does it mean to have this multiplicity, which is also about like a dissensus happening as well? You know, yeah. I don't think I answered your question though, but.
I love hearing your thoughts though, and yeah. Well, can I just add something? What I do in my performance work, which is hard to see through video and whatnot, is that I'm often giving people clipboards with paperwork on it, but underneath the paperwork is copies of, depending on the work, what legislation has been passed in relation to the questions that I'm posing in that specific piece. And the more people have to wait in the waiting room or the office, the more they start reading, and they're actually kind of surprised by what they read. And it's made me realize, like, talking about history and how it's written, how people don't even know the language in which, and the laws that are being passed in which these legislators that we're voting in the office, like what they're actually coming up with and what they're signing off on, and that it's just amazing that people are, and I understand why, because we can only take on so much as individuals, you know, in our society, and we have to, you know, put the trust in the elected officials. But it is fascinating experience to watch people unpack what they don't understand. And some of these documents are a lot older, and some of them are more recent. And so people are surprised by the very much more recent things that have happened. But I think now I'm seeing it's actually, I don't know, I go down this rabbit hole, but yeah.
How do you balance it? What's the role for you of like civic responsibility or being service and education? Like, I'm working on a memorial, and I feel like part of it is like, I feel as though it's I'm very aware of it being serving or a partly educational role. So I'm wondering, like, for you, like responsibility, service, education, how you deal with like the humor.
Mm-hmm.
the absurd, but then you're subverting in this, you know, info. But then other times depending on what it is, like I was seeing a white person, a white Western American person with the blanket is very jarring. You know, a very different response to that than if I saw a black or brown person. But that also speaks about where I'm sitting. You know, so I was thinking about that. What is that like? Did that discomfort or the kind of assumptions, the racism, the xenophobia, all those things that could come up with something like just those blankets? You know, I'm just curious how you deal with that, or what, I don't know.
Well, so I think over the years of doing this work, I've seen what's actually, what's become an opening for people to learn something new, but not be like giving them a lesson, you know, an education, you know, because I'm not, and I am teaching in a way, but I'm not teaching like in academia, you know, but I'm revealing. I think I'm kind of in the process of revealing to people what they don't know already exists within society, and in different ways and different levels. And honestly, every time I do a performance, something new is revealed to me about myself and what I haven't seen yet, and my awareness is expanded, and that comes up through conversations with participants. And also I've done some video works of people's responses after going through the work. I'm not interviewing them, but I've had a friend do that, and that's very enlightening to hear that too. But yeah, I have to walk this line for myself of feeling like I'm pushing a lot of information onto people, because I feel like they only have so much space to receive. And so I want to be specific about when I enter that into the realm in the office and when I offer it to them. So the blankets are a whole other conversation, Karyn. I love to talk about those. But
one other question.
Yeah.
This is my last question, I promise. So the
vintage. Go ahead. This is great.
Yeah, this is what we're supposed to do, I think.
I'm wondering about like what it would like. I understand the nostalgia, what that clues into, the look of that office, and those offices actually are vintage, but some of them still exist today, depending on the wealth of a state, a city. But then there's that other side of like the high-tech sterile, which is more frightening. Like I'm wondering about like, do you think it's important to keep that look, because it maybe signals a time where it was bureaucratic, but there was a bit of ignorance that we accepted. Well, now we won't accept it. I'm wondering like how it functions, you know, as opposed to maybe an office today that, I don't know, that might have the technology it's more insidious almost, because it's like there's, you know.
Yeah, security cameras and like you can't see it.
You know?
Yeah, that's interesting.
That you're this way, I feel is more like welcoming, because we kind of know when that was from, you know?
Well, for me, this office is really about growing up with a mom who was a court reporter. And yeah, so my dad was a public servant. He taught in the public school system and also was a public speaker, which I didn't really know growing up much about the public speaking aspect. But yeah, so my mom would have a office in our home where she would do her work. And both of my parents were working parents, obviously going out into the world. And that was a way for me to go into her office and actually connect with this feeling of empowerment that my mom actually, you know, would be in this space working, and then would, you know, she would go out in the world and do her work as a court reporter and come back and work on her typewriter and have her stamps. And she was a notary public, because you have to be, and all of those things. So for me, this environment started from a place of empowerment, and for a connection with my mom. But, and I originally didn't know that, I'll be honest, like I was just drawn to it for some reason. But also there's nostalgia, that can be positive and negative, I think, for me, about about this time where we would communicate face to face, or we would communicate on paper. And there's something about the physical that I think grounds me as an artist and as a creative. And then in this virtual realm, which is ironic that I'm sitting in one of my offices in virtual space right now, that I get lost in. Like I feel this disconnection that starts happening between me and other people. And so it's something about bringing us back to a space. But this space is also controversial because it is a bureaucratic space and a lot of people feel unempowered in that. And so I'm trying to kind of flip that a little bit and play with that and push at that. Does that make sense?
Your work, I think your work reminds me that if you are from the margins or you're more vulnerable, your interactions with the state are much more common and much more dangerous. And I was watching, the perhaps heterosexual cis white man smiling that there was no trauma, no memory for him, and he could play through this. And I think it's very interesting how different people are responding. And the Black father who is saying, thank you for bringing this to the fore. And the response is very different. It's all about what gets to be official and how you interact with the state.
Yeah, and I've had actually, I would say there's a certain demographic. I would say older white males over 65. They have confronted me with a lot of aggression, not everyone, of course, but they'll start taking things off my desk. They'll start demanding in my face, like to tell me what I think politically. They try to reclaim the power in this space because I'm wearing this suit and I have these glasses. And it's kind of, in some ways, it's hilarious how I've been able to just kind of reclaim that or try to take that from these, or they feel like I'm taking it from them and had that response. So, yeah, thank you for those insights and reflections. Yeah, and I, honestly, Karyn, I don't think I've had a lot of conversation specifically thinking about people and their race and their lived experience sitting in those blankets yet. I do know, and I chose those blankets for a reason. I started seeing images, and as we all did in the media, and I have a journalism background, which I can share later, but in the media in detention centers around the country, immigrant detention centers, and people are wrapped in these, trying to sleep in this material, which is totally uncomfortable, of course. And dehumanizing. I just felt like it was extremely dehumanizing and shocking, and it was not okay to look at that. There's so many other things that happen in the media and the footage that we see that are dehumanizing and not okay to watch and triggering too. But I wanted to have people use a little bit of that and have them feel that a little bit, but your point is like they, also Sheri, like you can't actually feel that when you're wrapped in that, because if you're a white male, like you're feeling something different than if you're a Black man, or an immigrant in this country, and I'm really interested in those different responses and want to do this work more and understand specifically what's coming up for people beyond just being really hot. So.
Are certain places where you do it where you predominantly get a certain demographic, or can you kind of tailor it in that way to kind of, because I'm wondering then would you tailor the projects considering the demographic?
Wait, I'm sorry, start the question. I didn't hear the first part of it.
With these projects, do you ever have a pretty homogeneous demographic?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in certain museums, probably most of the museums I've been in, because they're in the South, in this part of the South, in the white affluent part of the South. I guess I would say in my area, it's hard to I'm just thinking about all the museums I've been in. So I get a very similar response from that demographic of mostly white people. But when I do it on the street, which is a little bit more challenging given support and also security with stuff, but I have a different conversation, and that's actually what really excites me. But I do know it's important to have it in different environments and compare the two and understand that there's different transformation that can happen in different conversation. But Karyn, I want to say that when I was looking at at your piece, your monument piece, and I love that the connection of the reflection within my work, the actual reflection of the material, and that I felt like that monument was a portal. It just like, I just kept coming up to me that people are being like, looking at this work, and even the way it's in the environment, like it feels like a portal into something different and new, and something that can be healing, and that sense of reflection, and you're kind of sucked into it, and also just like reflected back at you. I mean, I just thought it was so beautiful, and I wanted to honor that and say that out loud to you.
Work out well, artworks, but this one, I'm like, this one, score.
Yeah.
I just had no idea it was going to be beyond what you just said, the portal. I wasn't thinking portal. I was like, yeah, reflect back, but it's like, it became like a healer, you know?
Yeah. We have time for one more question. I'm going to give it back to Ladan, because I know what's your favorite remaining question to ask?
Oh boy. I mean, even just how our conversation developed, Stacey, you answered one of my questions, and that was, and Karyn, please feel free to answer this as well, but it's just, when you're talking about your background and your connection to your mother, how your language as artists are what they are today, like how that has developed. That was just one of the questions that you answered, Stacey, but Karyn, you can as well.
I think being in Trinidad, being an immigrant, I mean, I grew up in this country, but I mean, I look back at some works I've made that it was totally about growing up in Brooklyn, but spending my summers in Trinidad. Mm-hmm. You know, my grandparents, both sides lived 4 blocks away from each other. So just, I think about, you know, when I make these works, like taking the familiar and kind of repositioning them. It's like, that's just what we did, you know? Literally, I made this piece called Fruit Barricade, where it was based on a memory, or when you go to Trinidad on the main highway at rush hour, it's the fruit market, because the traffic is so bad to the fruit market. So I think about the mutability of objects. Like, yes, everything has a function, but in a pinch, that chair is your ladder, that chair is your table, that chair, you know. So I think it's being in a developing country, coming from a developing or shithole country, as the president calls it, you know, the sidewalk, of course you'll sell goods there. Why not? That you have the audience, people walk. So I think my thinking about the familiar, or the idea of the what if, or like, this is a known, but it may have to do this to make do. So I think that's part of my thinking of, you know, I think about, you know, every August 1st, we had to go to like the Independence Day, and I was always like had to dress up, my grandpa, like in the heat. But the idea of like that, thinking of like what it means to be like free, like not being beholden to the colonized power. I think that was kind of always embedded, you know, like a pride in what that is to be Trinidadian. And yes, you have a thing, you're between two worlds, but there's something about seeing that, like carnival, you know, the janitor, the school is like, it comes out with the biggest mass at carnival. Like the idea that the possibility was for everyone. You know, the school teachers also playing in the band that wins like the best steel band competition. You know what I mean? So I think that thing of that mutability of things, of the world, and you can always be reinvented. Like that is just embedded in the culture. I think that's part of it. Yeah.
Do I have time for one more?
If they can answer in like 2 minutes.
All right. So, I mean, as artists, as people, we are constantly shifting. We're constantly coming anew with ourselves. I mean, we even see this with our conversation of portals or reflections, or how objects are so mutable. So nonetheless, we're always absorbing new information. Where do you see yourself or your work currently shifting?
That's not a 2-minute question.
Oh, it's not. I'm sorry.
Like the timer.
Let's do it this way. Can you think of one word, each of you, to describe your knit connection?
Wait, say that. I'm sorry, Sheri.
One word that would describe the direction Can you answer that in one word? Say 2 words. It's okay if you can't.
Well, I mean, the only thing that keeps coming up, and this is because a collaborator I work with, is pivot. I'm having.
They keep using that about like the virus. I feel like you keep hearing the word pivot. We're pivoting to online teaching.
I know, we're pivoting. It's so annoying. I'm just kidding.
I think my thing is I'm trying to, now that this is a moment where people are recognizing monuments and memorials, what would it look like? Like, I'm not into the idea of permanence, but what could I make now that could maybe have relevance 10 years from now? So I'm thinking about other ways of understanding what a monument or memorial is, and what are the ones, like, how do I envision what hasn't been created yet in terms of that, you know?
Okay. Well, I want to thank you both and I want to thank Ladan for her wonderful questions, and we're going to close out now. I want to remind people that part 3 of Rights and Wrongs will be on Tuesday, November 10th from 12 to 1:30. That will be Amelia Mesa Baines, hosted by Kenneth Krafchek, who is director of the MFA of Community Arts. And of course, finally, we want to encourage you to vote if you can, and to download our wonderful posters by the Globe Press. And please, let's visually thank our guests for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
You only hear us, but they're doing it. I know.
I can hear it.
And thank you all. This was great.